Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have another update for you from the brand Yema. A little about them. They're a historic brand revival, and they've been, part of French watchmaking since 1948. Now, in terms of the type of watch, this actually covers two different genres. First of all, the dive watch, some key characteristics and design. When you're looking for a dive watch, you're going to want water resistance, typically through some type of screw down crown. You want something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. But this is also a traveler's watch, where you're going to be looking for something like a GMT or a world timer function, so you're able to track multiple time zones with relative ease. This is their Superman 500 GMT in the Batman color scheme. Yes, Superman and Batman on the same watch. Wow. As a DC Comics fan, I'm torn and thrilled at the same time. So a little bit about this particular model. It's a major evolution of Yema's 1960s iconic model. The new Superman 500 GMT preserves its main professional diving features while providing a GMT function for all globetrotters. Equipped with their in-house caliber YEMA3000 and for the first time water resistant up to 500 meters, this enhanced Superman benefits from a modernized architecture and substantial technical improvements that position it as the ultimate French professional diver's watch. Kind of tough to argue with that. You can actually get this for $13.99 direct from Yema, and that's on the bracelet. I believe it is a little bit cheaper if you wanted to opt for getting it on strap. But this thing is pretty sweet. I'm really excited to share it with you. So big ups to Yema for sending it in. I believe this is just a pre-production prototype, but it is going to be pretty close to what you guys will be receiving if you order this piece. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys. So, I mean, apart from anything, just to jump right into it, while the camera focuses, is I love the color play on here. This is great. I love the gray and the blue. I don't think they're the first ones to ever do that, but the nice thing about this type of layout is nobody really owns it yet, right? If they would have went black and blue for the bezel, although this is named the Batman colorway, it would have been, I think, a little bit more of a clear homage. Here, you're getting that touch of originality, and again, that nice kind of gray colorway actually just, though depending on the light, it will kind of fade anyway, and it becomes very dark and almost like it's just a solid bezel color versus the two-tone, which in the light, it actually is very nice to look at. And this is a really cool piece that blends really well. It's not necessarily relying on its vintage chops to get it by any means. I think it does have enough modern touches to make it quite contemporary and still very stylish, individually, on its own merits. So there are two different sizes. This one is the 39 millimeter, so it's 39 millimeters in diameter. Across, you're getting 13.9 millimeters thick, and then 48.2 millimeters lug to lug. It's stainless steel, mainly brushed with a few polished accents. You can see like the center links as well as the crown itself. Everything else is pretty just going to be satin brush, but a nice satin. Check that out. Look at the way the light glides over the lugs and that end link. And look at that end link. Look at the way it drops. Yes, that's what we want to see watch manufacturers, this right here, instead of it holding out and then creating, an extra lug to lug with. It's nice that it just drops. So if you do have a smaller wrist, this is going to fit you a little bit better. And you can see it still does have kind of that key, flatter with a slight arch in terms of that mid case that Yema's known for. So it still has that character, but it's going to be a little bit more wearable from a functional standpoint, which I like. Getting into the sapphire on here, the crystal is a nice sapphire. I don't believe it has an anti-reflective coating, but I'm not sure how much that would help anyway, considering you have such a bright, glossy dial, which is deep and inky, which is great when you don't have direct light on it, but it is going to, of course, reflect when you are extreme. This is reflecting directly off of the studio light there, but in most cases it's definitely quite legible, even with this beautifully domed sapphire. You can see it's double domed because really the only play you're going to get visually in terms of distortion is going to be at the very outer edges of that box dome. So very, very nice, very legible, and I just love the color play, the pops of red. This bezel is actually bi-directional, but it is locked in place because it does have the locking bezel feature. Now, on the diver, it really made sense to still keep something like this. I mean, I think visually and then historically, it's nice to keep it on here, but my preference would be for this model that you just forego this part, because when you unscrew the crown, now you're able to engage this bezel, which it has a great action, guys, at 24 clicks. So one for every position. It's very solid. No real play. You can rock it a little bit, but not really. You can barely see anything moving if I rock it. But it's very nice. I wish that this wasn't locked down, because I understand for a diver, you'd want it locked down, locked in. But for a traveler's watch, especially since you wouldn't really be using this for dive timing, really, I mean, you could, but it would be, a little bit counterintuitive, and that just ends up being the trade-off whenever you have something that's kind of meeting two criteria versus it being dedicated to one. Oh, also, this is a more of a traveler, not a traveler style, but the office or a collar style GMT. So it has the independently adjustable 24-hour hand, and then of course a quick set date feature, which honestly for most people is going to be preferable. Although yes, there are more expensive ways to do this, like having a jumping hour. In this case, you have the jumping 24-hour hand, but it does help again for that quick set date, so that you have that capability versus having to cycle all the way through like you would on a true quote unquote or traveler's style GMT. So now that that's all out of the way, you do have a signed crown, as you can see. Really beautiful case back. I was really impressed by this. Check that out. That is really, really cool. I like that it's inset, right? So like, hey, Seiko, take notes. You know, your wave pattern sticks out most of the time. I think the Slim Turtle's the first time they made it inset like that. But the thing that's good about it being inset is that it doesn't add any thickness. So I dig that. And then of course it's quite handsome. You can see it has that kind of Yema Y crest there. Looks very grand. All of the little items etched. And behind this case back, although you can't see it, it's their in-house French automatic GMT caliber YEMA3000. So you're getting 29 joules, 4 hertz, 42-hour power reserve, and it's tuned to plus or minus 10 seconds a day, down from the normal maximum rate of plus or minus 25 seconds. So that's awesome. And honestly, it's probably going to be tuned slightly tighter than that. I haven't worn this like back to back to say, okay, hey, you know, I'm getting plus or minus 2 seconds a day on it or anything like that, but it hasn't really deviated from the time that I've had it with me. So I'm not seeing it standing out as anything to be worried about by any means. And the fact that they actually tune them to plus or minus 10 just means that again, that's a wider range of variance, but it's still tighter ultimately than just being unregulated, right? If it was completely unregulated, to be 25 plus or minus 25, I can appreciate that they're tuning it at least to where they can guarantee and say, hey, it's going to be plus or minus 10 for you, right? If Seiko just did that, oh man, they'd make a lot of people happy. So although, you know, again, just like with this movement or any unregulated movement, you know, you can get different ends of the spectrum. You might get one that is going to be absolutely plus or minus 10, or you might get one that's plus or minus 1 or less than 1. The odds are probably going to be more in your favor that you're going to get something more accurate than what's advertised, because that's just the way it works when it comes to limitations, right? So people are only going to want to guarantee a very specific spec if they believe that it can actually meet that. So hey, kudos to Yema for saying, hey, plus or minus 10, we're comfortable with that and confident, especially when it comes to a new in-house movement. So getting it to this dial, it is a beautiful glossy inky black there, just renders as black. There's no anthracite or faded tropic tones to be found. This is just a beautiful black dial, and I really dig that. You're getting printed indices, you're getting Superluminova BGW9 grade A. Yes, so this is gonna have some mighty fine lume, and even though it's not super thickly applied or anything like that, it's still really good lume, so it's gonna look good, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you guys. And then getting down to the water resistance, again, 50 bar or 1650 feet or 500 meters. That's definitely really nice, and a new feature of this. So again, it's still relatively thin at under 14 millimeters. It's 13.9. And yeah, you're getting 500 meters water resistance, and you're getting a GMT complication. So that's just really cool. And look at how thin this mid case is. Like, that's just, I like that. I like that there's some justification for the thickness. I'd say any watch that's thick, they should just try to, if they're not going to be able to thin things down for whatever production or aesthetic reasons, then they should at least make them more water resistant, just so it makes sense to people. So then getting into some of those other details. 19 millimeter lug width. They are drilled lugs, so it's going to be really easy to swap those out if you need to. Although 19 millimeters isn't super common, it's definitely more common than it was a couple years ago, where now you're seeing more odd numbers where you're getting 19 and 21 millimeter strap options from a lot of different brands, not just like specifically, custom tailored straps that you're going to have made bespoke. You could actually just get them now. Typically just they're stocked and orderable, and I really look at the play of light on these. It's just really cool. I dig that a lot. So it does taper down from 19 millimeters to 16. It has friction pin connectors, which isn't great, but you know what? These are relatively thin links, so it's forgivable from that perspective, because it is adding a whole lot of comfort with that thinness, and with, of course, all that extra articulation. And you can see that's not sagging too bad either. So the tolerances on this are quite tight. That's about as much flex in either direction as I can get. So, and it's not jangly. So very nice to be that comfortable, that thin, without it actually feeling jangly. The clasp itself is semi-milled, so it's going to be stamped on the exterior, and then milled on the interior where it counts, right? You're gonna want this nice, because the exterior, it actually flows really nicely in terms of the silhouette, so I don't mind that part being stamped. But this, and whenever this is stamped, it just feels super cheap, so it's nice to have that milled. You're also getting a milled diver's extension, which is great. Micro adjust holes, so you can really dial in the fitment on here. Very handsome, and you can see there's even some extra little messaging that's engraved there that just, it just shows a little extra level of care, which I can appreciate. Although this is all friction fit, again, it flows so nicely with the bracelet. I can't be too mad at it. So with all that said, let's actually get this piece on wrist and see how it wears. Okay, as you can see on my 7 1/4, 7.5 inch wrist, this little 39 millimeter wears really nicely, and a lot of that has to do with the dial to bezel proportions. So even though if I get a little bit closer, of course, you're gonna get some lens distortion. It's gonna really make the watch feel a bit oversized and overpowering on the wrist. If I take a little step back and then just tighten the shot in, you can see that it does sit really well centered on the wrist and still has a good amount of wrist presence. And that's a nice thing. For me, even with my slightly larger than normal wrist size, this 39 is actually a really nice choice. And then a lot of it has to do with those proportions. The lugs look great. The amount of uniformity within the brushing there, it just kind of creates a big, a kind of more full visual weight there, which is nice. And you're getting a relatively small dial, but it's spaced really nicely, and then you're getting that kind of thinner profile on the bezel, which definitely makes the watch feel like it has a little bit more wrist presence, even though it is technically a smaller watch with a smaller footprint. And check that out. So you look at this watch and you just see how thin the mid case is. You don't really see the under portion of that case back because it's sitting within your wrist, right? You do see the top hat there on the bezel, but this just renders and wears as a very thin piece, and I like that. I like the extra effort that they put into understanding and appreciating the wear dynamics there. So with that said, let's go ahead and get this off the wrist, laid out for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Yes, as you can see, that BGW9 looks absolutely fantastic, pumping away, and that is without even any type of charging. That was just being underneath the studio lights. I'm going to go ahead and hit it with a little bit of black light just so you guys can get a look at kind of everything to see how it all glows. Very, very nice, very blue, very bright. Grade A, guys. BGW9 grade A. So they went through the trouble of getting that grade A feature, and they're going to flex it, and it looks good. So one thing I do like to always work into these loom shots is low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to be in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs or the shade of a tree, or maybe just spending time in your favorite automobile. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe even include some harsh lighting that would typically expose any type of production defects. In this case, you can see a little bit of cloudiness on that polishing just from my fingerprints and the grease there, but you can see everything else is just gorgeous, very uniform. I really do appreciate the brushing. Look at the way the light glides over that brushing. Not very harsh, very nice and linear, and I dig that. And that dial, if you guys have been paying attention, is extremely legible. Even in, yes, it does have great loom, so it's going to be legible with the loom, but you can see even in mixed lighting situations, you're still getting a nice amount of contrast. And then you get into these weird situations where, bam, look at that beautiful bezel insert with the day-night indication, the upper half being gray, the lower half being blue. So you do have, a nice understanding of, as you're going there, 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of night. So you can kind of separate the 6 a.m. versus 6 p.m. or 1800. So that's definitely a nice feature, and it looks great. And you can see how many times it just doesn't look like that. So if you're very much into, more sedate colorways, this is going to render like just a black watch and a lot of lights. But then you get into it, and then you get this nice little surprise, which I think is very, very cool. So guys, closing thoughts on this one. Classic proportions, they really fit almost any situation, and it definitely oozes that vintage appeal without just relying on it though, right? Because it does have some cool updated specs and features, and I think the ultimate layout and some of the things that they did in terms of the looks look great, and they don't necessarily have to look vintage. It's like the way they did the brushing and just the overall approach. I think the silhouette is really nice, and it isn't necessarily relying as much as some other designs do when it comes to kind of the vintage appeal. So in terms of model variants, this is also available in 41mm sizes, which will get you that 20mm lug width. And then, of course, there's a bunch of different colorways. This one is the one that I preferred, but definitely check the link down in the description and kind of dig around and see what other options there are that you might like. In terms of comparable models, there are a few vintage-inspired kind of diver GMTs, but honestly, there are even fewer that are this unique that have actual heritage, right? I think that's what really always helps Yema stand out, is that they do have a unique design aesthetic that is absolutely their own. And yeah, they might pepper in a couple of design inspirations, but it always feels like a Yema watch, which is nice that they have their own design language, their own brand language, their own history that they can recall back to. So for me, the bottom line is this is a very handsome and capable traveler kind of sports watch offering that it just gives you a ton of style with that unique heritage. And I think that's a cool combination. No, it's not, super affordable. It's not under $1,000 or anything like that, but at under $1,500 for a fully in-house movement, that's that's saying something. That's special, and that costs in terms of production costs. So it's not like Yema decided to just mark these up and say, hey, we're going to give all of ourselves a raise. There's some associated cost that is going to be speaking for those additional margins in pricing. So with all that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do it like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.